So we're gonna start with this 10-minute video. I'll talk for a while. Near the end, so you'll know like when we're near the end, there's a shorter video near the end. There'll be just a little bit more after that, and then there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. All right, let's go.
I hereby declare that the postponed 2020 General Conference is now adjourned. Amen.
Beginning April 23rd, 2024, delegates from across our worldwide connection came together for the United Methodist Church's General Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina. Let's see what happened.
Loving every bit, the worship, the preaching.
The one thing that we do better than anybody I know is worship together.
Every worship service I've been in has just been spectacular, and that's the wrong word. It's built my faith.
Are you ready to be the people that God needs for us to be? Let's go.
There's just a lot of hope going around, and it makes me very happy to be here, and it makes me happy for where the church, I hope, is headed.
How people are talking together, how people are praying together, singing together. People are more open to relationship, to learning about each other, to learning about issues.
It's a good experience being here too to discuss issue, moving our church forward.
This feels like community and the church and fullness and wholeness.
This is an opportunity for a new beginning, and there's so much hope that I've seen during this General Conference.
General Conference is the prime decision-making body and the only organization that can speak on behalf of the United Methodist Church. Effective decision-making is grounded in effective communication.
That helps reinforce the vision of the church and also our identity as United Methodists. What we're trying to do is democratize access to information.
Our role is to be the trumpet for this entire denomination globally and highlight all of the work that's happening around the world. And we remain very committed to that mission.
I've learned that it's a very connectional church.
Our agencies can help live our mission beyond the local church. It's a great opportunity for us to expand a lot of the ministry beyond our borders.
The General Conference offers an opportunity to celebrate the strength of witness we build through our connectional United Methodist system.
We had the commissioning for new missionaries from GBGM, from everywhere to everywhere.
I present our new missionaries commissioned to service on behalf of the United Methodist Church.
We're an organization that's been mandated through the church, through the Book of Discipline, to engage the church, hold the church accountable, while also building up resources and thinking through what it means to be a church that is equitable and just.
I'm representing Christian Unity and the Council of Bishops.
We've been working with Church and Society, with GBHEM, of course with G-Corps, with Discipleship Ministries.
Gracious and loving God, our hearts are full today because this is your day.
The church is growing and it is on the move.
The Holy Spirit is moving and birthing a church that we always knew was there.
We have not only worshiped, we have commissioned missionaries. We have engaged in receiving petitions that have to do with acts of repentance for heinous acts. We've tended to conversations about healing for people who are the victims of sexual violence.
Today, we're observing the Thursdays in Black campaign. So it's a global movement to end all forms of sexual violence and gender-based violence.
When we came into General Conference, there were many who were concerned about the 3 R's: regionalization, revised social principles, and removing restrictive language.
It is moved to adopt calendar item number 22, worldwide regionalization. Calendar item number 22 has been approved.
It's a very good step
towards collaboration as one people, as one family.
We used to be a U.S. church with satellites in different parts of the world. Now we'll become a truly global church where we relate to each other on a more equal level.
We are a beautiful, diverse, international, worldwide church, and the regionalization plan is a reflection of what that looks like.
Today, we have taken a journey whereby every region within our church will be on the same level.
We don't want anybody to be at the center except for our Lord Jesus Christ, and all of us will exist with total equity, sharing the gifts and the resources that we may offer to each other.
The affirmative has it, and the motion is adopted.
Delegates without debate passed an end to a 40-year-old ban on self-avowed practicing homosexuals from being clergy.
We passed the removal of this ban on gay clergy with an overwhelming 93% affirmative vote, a signal of a new period of unity in our church.
We have more traditional people, we have more progressive people, we have people with different views, but we're open to everyone. And now we are truly open to everyone. It's an exciting day for the United Methodist Church.
To me, this is just a reflection of the truth about the church that I've always known.
It is a day of celebration, a day that I have a sense of peace and of joy.
Maybe for the first time when we say open hearts, open minds, open doors, we are consistent with our message. Like, we really mean it this time.
This has really been a 12-year effort to revise these social principles, and our goal, as directed by the General Conference, was to make them more concise, more theologically grounded, and reflective of our worldwide denomination as we begin this next chapter of United Methodism.
I have felt a real sense of our commitment to personal holiness and social holiness.
We're serious about helping people come to find Christ, to know Christ, and then to go live out their faith in the world in a way that sees the kingdom of God come on earth as it is in heaven.
It was an amazing undertaking.
People all over the church and the world have been working on it.
Well, we're really excited to have a completely brand new judicial council who can help walk us through the process of regionalization. We're also very excited that we've been able to enter into an official communion agreement with the Episcopal Church. We're also working on our commitment to Christian unity and reconciliation by developing an official agreement to create an apology on behalf of the United Methodist Church for our involvement in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. We also just passed the smallest budget in the history of the General Conference. The U.S. jurisdictions have agreed to no elections for the time being, and a total of 32 U.S. bishops allocated across the jurisdictions. And deacons finally have sacramental authority in ministry contexts.
Calendar item number 554 is adopted. This is an historic moment.
We are registering people for the General Conference.
I am a marshal.
I'm here on an official monitoring for GCOS row.
I'm serving as a translator and interpreter for Portuguese and English.
Clergy delegate from the Mountain Sky Conference.
I'm serving as a page. Each session of General Conference is streamed live, and every day over 1,000 people participate in General Conference as a delegate, observer, or volunteer.
There is a lot going on in the plenary, but there is a lot also that's going on behind the scenes, like communications-wise and all the logistics. So we thank you very much for everyone who's helping out making this happen.
We have a very different church. We are moving forward as a different church. This is a new day.
There's a bright hope for the future and for the church as well.
We are having a new set of mindset of change for everyone to feel inclusive.
The most important thing about Methodism to me is the being able to be connected with people who are different than us and agreeing on these most important things.
I think the main thing is we continue to reach souls for Jesus Christ. That always has been part of our Methodism, our connection.
It's a delight to watch the United Methodist Church move with confidence and energy and boldness into the future. To me, that's what it means to be UMC.
Yes, we are excited about our future. God is doing a new thing. There is a renewed hope and a renewed focus in the life of our church as we continue to expand our witness for Jesus Christ and live into our mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world.
I really like that video. To me, it really represents energy and the joy. The legislation, yes, but the spirit.
Amazing helps Anthony through night classes.
No.
Amazing starts at CSL Plasma. Donate plasma today.
Donate plasma today. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Did you notice in the video repetition of words like hope, connection, collaboration, and moving forward? I really felt like that was the spirit of what was going on. I heard those words all week, both 2 weeks as well. And all through the halls, people kept stopping each other and saying, is this really General Conference? Is this General Conference? Because we've experienced it in other ways. So it's really fantastic. I'm very excited to be able to tell you about it. All right, so I'm going to zoom through my own presentation here, and please feel free to ask any questions, although it might be better to let me get through my thing and then ask questions at the end because I might be covering it. Okay, so a brief bit of background in case you have never been to a General Conference presentation, just to kind of what is General Conference? So the General Conference is the largest governing body in the United Methodist Church. We have several versions of conference. We United Methodists love the word conference. We use it to mean times, dates when we get together. We use it to mean a geographical designation. We use it to mean a legal entity. And we use it to mean the way that we conference together, the way that we work together. We don't have, as you well know, a pope in the United Methodist Church that declares from on high what the rules will be. We have a holy democracy, Batman, and we work together in conference and holy conferencing. So that's the way we work together. The smallest version of conference is the Charge Conference. And I'm going to show you, by which I mean Ben is going to show you, so this is the footprint of our Charge Conference. And it's right here, Wesley United Methodist Church. Usually your charge and your local church are the same thing. In July, just fun fact, we will be moving to a 2-point charge because we'll be wrapping an arm around West Olive United Methodist Church that's being unpaired from its 2-point charge with Morning Star. You don't need all the details right now, but Morning Star is going to be over sort of pair with Normal First, and West Olive is going to kind of pair with us. So we're getting ready to become a 2-point charge. But at this moment, our charge and our church are the same thing. The next level is our annual conference. We are called the Illinois Great Rivers Annual Conference, the southern 2/3 of Illinois. And we are in the Vermilion, used to be called the Vermilion, now called the North District. That's us. The next level up is called the Jurisdictional Conference. We are part of the North Central Jurisdiction. You can see who else is part of the North Central Jurisdiction. And then the largest body, as I said before, is the General Conference, the worldwide body of the United Methodist Church. Now, this is the map is a little bit misleading if you can't see the color code on the left. All the areas in red are real life United Methodist Church areas. But the pink is areas where we have missions. The orange brown is where we have affiliated United Methodist churches. The green areas where we have concordant, yellow is affiliated, and purple is allied. So there are denominations that relate to us, and in fact may attend the General Conference and have voice but not vote. But the red areas on this map are the ones that are the actual United Methodist Church. Our form of governance, as you may know, is very closely patterned on the United States form of government. We, like they, have a legislative, executive, and judicial branch. The General Conference is the legislative branch of the United Methodist Church. That's the body that sets legislation, that makes the rules. The executive branch is our bishops. They don't get to vote, but they preside over General Conference, and then they help enact those rules. And then the Judicial Council, which takes challenges, questions, trials, and that kind of thing. If anybody steps out of line, the Judicial Council is there to set them straight. Every 4 years, the General Conference gathers to make decisions for the worldwide church. Now, this is the one that we just came from. And if you're curious, somebody, able-bodied, thank you so much. If you're curious, you see where where the indentation is, like on the third row, there's the tech team, and then there's 2 rows, and then the indentation, that's my row. So that's where we were seated the whole time. That was our view. This year, the General Conference gathered in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was actually a really nice place to gather. Charlotte's a nice city. It's nicely laid out. It's safe. It's welcoming. Lots of restaurants. You can walk everywhere. It's lovely. All right. So this year's General Conference was actually the postponed 2020 General Conference, as you probably know. And in many places, it would be called the General Conference of 24. Sometimes it would be called the General Conference of 2020. Most often it was called the postponed 2020. Sometimes it was called the 2020 parentheses 24 General Conference. We have yet to figure out that mess, but we all know why it was postponed, right? COVID, right? Okay. So why does that matter? Well, it matters because the last time we had a book of discipline was in 2016. That's how many years ago? 8, 2 quadrennia ago. And normally, the General Conference meets every 4 years. We call that a quadrennia. That's a United Methodist word, means 4 years, a quadrennia. But since we did not meet in 2020, some things could not be handled, changed, voted on, put into place since 2016. So in some sense, we're still in the 2016 quadrennia. Well, now how many years is a quadrennia? Is it 4, 6, 7, or 8? A little hard to tell. Sometimes it makes a difference. A lot has happened in the 8 years since the last regular session of General Conference, and a lot has happened in the 5 years since the special called session of the General Conference. That was in 2019. Many of you remember that. That was a session that was called after the 2016 conference got so bogged down with fighting about human sexuality in particular. Not like there's not other things we fight about, but human sexuality in particular. We got so bogged down, so clogged up, we could not move forward. And the whole church was just right on the verge of splintering. So what they decided to do was to take out all the legislation having to do with human sexuality and give it to a special session that would deal with that topic only. So 2016 continued on, we finished the conference, we all went home and we held our breath until 2019 special called session that was held in St. Louis. And if you heard me talk about that before, it was really heartbreaking. The way that one turned out is that we looked at several plans to keep the church together, and the plan that triumphed, the plan that was affirmed, that was approved by the conference, was the plan that sought unity through enforcement, which is to say the rules got harsher, the enforcement got tighter, the punishments got harsher. That's the way that one turned out. And right after that, I'll talk about this later, but anyway, that was the last time we were together. So we were all in the mood for something a little different after that. Since the 2019 called session, a lot has changed. For example, because of the 2019, we elected a bunch of delegations of centrist progressive and centrist progressive, people who are in the center or lean a little bit left, in order to undo or try to undo what was done in 2019. We went through the period of imagining that the protocol, which was, as I think about it, I'm thinking all these things that were important to me, but old legislation that died may not be important, but I'll just name them quickly. We went through the protocol of reconciliation through separation. We went through the Christmas covenant, the launch of the global Methodist Church, that was just last May of 23, and of course, a global pandemic. So it's kind of like the world has turned 5, 6, 7, 8 times since 2019. So a lot was riding on the session. We had a lot built up and we had a lot to undo. So we had over 700 pieces of legislation that had been prepared for 2020. Okay, more than 700 pieces of legislation that were waiting for us from the 2020 session we didn't get to have, some of which had become irrelevant by that point. Plus, we had 350 some items that were submitted for the 2024 session. So all in all, we had how many petitions? 1,099 petitions to go through in 10 days. It was a lot of work. With that many petitions, and all of them have to be dealt with. They either have to be dismissed, defeated, bundled, passed, amended, but you can't just say we're not going to deal with that. Everything has to be dealt with. With that much legislation, we decided we need to focus on some priorities. We need to get our heads straight and get everybody together. So the three priorities, and you heard Bishop Bickerton refer to it in the video, were the removal of the restrictive language, the revised social principles, and regionalization. We call them the 3 R's to help keep them in our heads. So I'm going to talk about those 3 for the bulk of this presentation, because those are the 3 that were the most important. They were our priorities. They were the most earth-shaking, as it were, and they're the ones that the media tapped into the most. So even if you haven't heard anything in a church, the media has reported on some of these things, and some of those names will be familiar. So let's start with the removal of the restrictive, otherwise known as harmful language about LGBTQ persons. So here's a little history about that. I won't go too far back, but predecessor bodies of the United Methodist Church, namely the Methodist Church and the Evangelical United Brethren Church, didn't have any language, not restrictive, not affirming, just no language about homosexuality in their discipline. It just sort of wasn't a thing people talked about then. But after the UMC came into being in 1968, talk about homosexuality and sexuality in general, in wake of the free love movement, began to be a topic that kind of dominated culture. And so at the 1972 General Conference, my dad was present then, he still has his hymnal, a sentence was added to the social principles, and it came in 2 parts. This is interesting to me. So this is the first time this has happened. First, General Conference affirmed that homosexual persons, no less than heterosexual persons, are individuals of sacred worth. This was a close vote, but it did pass. Immediately thereafter, a delegate who I think was from Texas stood and proposed that the period at the end of the sentence be replaced with a comma, and that we add the language, though we do not condone the practice of homosexuality and consider this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. Here's where the tug of war began, right here. This is it, 1972. In 1984, the language began to make its way from the social principles where it had been to, the social principles are where the church expresses its convictions about the world that we live in, about our social stances. Began to move from the social principles into the rule book section of the Book of Discipline and made the position a policy. So now we started having language like this is in the section about ordination. Language like, self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not allowed to be ordained or appointed. So that started in 1984. And then every 4 years, it got a little more restrictive. It got just a little bit worse. I would say, but worse is my language, but I'm just saying more restrictive and less welcoming to people, okay? Sometimes something would be added to make the language a little bit more friendly, but then just like in 1972, it would immediately be paired with something on the other side. So it just kept kind of moving less and less hospitable. Later, general conferences added language punishing clergy who conducted same-sex weddings, prohibiting United Methodist funds for being used to promote the acceptance of homosexuality, and started implementing penalties for bishops who did not enforce the laws. Restrictive language appeared in at least 5 or 6 different sections of the Book of Discipline, which is part of why it was complicated getting that language out, but we'll get there. This is a side note, this is neither here nor there, but there's nothing in the Book of Discipline and never has been about transgender persons. That's just something that either hasn't hit the waves yet, or it's not, I don't know what, but there's nothing in there about transgender. Back to 2019, you might remember that the whole session was dedicated to how the church might stay together. And there were several different plans that were proposed in different ways that we might hold the United Methodist Church together despite this particular conflict. The solution reached, as I said just a minute ago, by a very slim majority. Very slim was 438 to 384. 20-something votes, was unity, I guess a little more than 20-something votes. My math is not so good, but it was really slim. Was essentially unity through enforcement, otherwise known as the traditional plan, which upheld all the restrictive language, added punishments for those who disobeyed, and essentially left the church in tatters. An uprising of resistance followed 2019, which included nationwide efforts to elect more progressive delegations, statements of non-compliance by annual conferences and boards of ordained ministry who said, we won't do that. We know that's what the church voted, but that's wrong and we won't. And even non-compliance by bishops who said, if I get complaints on my desk, I'm just going to ignore them. So there was a huge resistance to 2019. Clearly, this was not the will of the whole body. Another thing that happened since 2019 was we learned to sort of join forces with each other. Several groups who all seek greater inclusivity and justice for all people. And I don't know if you can see any of those small letters or not, but you've got everything from Pacific Islanders Caucus of United Methodists to United Methodist Clergy Caucus to the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement, Congress of the Deaf, Federation for Social Action, Association of Ministers with Disabilities, Black Methodists for Church Renewal, Metodistas Asociados Representando la Causa Hispanoamericanos. All these groups joined forces and formed a coalition that became known as LINC, Love Your Neighbor Coalition, LYNC, the Love Your Neighbor Coalition. Actually, the LINC coalition existed in 2012, but it got broader, deeper, and more effective in preparation for this particular session. We learned to work together. As a result of learning to work together, all that restricted language, piece by piece, was removed from the Book of Discipline. That's the first amazing thing that we did at General Conference. It removed us back then, by removing that language, it moved us back to the neutral language as we had in 1972 or so, where nobody was condemned for anything, okay? Except for, crimes and really bad things. Now, I do want you to note, because it's sort of important to the story, we did not replace the restrictive language with inclusive language, okay? We did not replace restrictive or limiting or harmful language with affirming language. We left it neutral. Why did we do that? That was very much on purpose, and it very much required the agreement of the whole coalition. We all had to agree, because most of us wanted more inclusive, more affirming, more positive language stuck in there. But what we agreed to do was to move slowly and carefully and see if we could bring our central conference, that is to say, United Methodists from outside the United States, along. See if we could all move together. See if we could remain the big tent that still loves liberals and progressives, still loves conservatives and traditionalists, still loves everybody. We don't all have to agree. We can live together in the same church. And so that was our hope, is that we could get to big tent status again. And that's what we were able to do by removing that language. So that was really pretty exciting. And I want to show you some examples. So we removed the funding ban. The General Committee on Finance no longer has to ensure that no annual conference, board, agency, committee, commission, or council shall give United Methodist funds to any gay caucus or group, or otherwise use such funds to promote the acceptance of homosexuality. Nor, this is in the same sentence, get this. Remember what I said about sometimes one sentence and then the second half of the sentence? Or violate the express commitment of the UMC not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay family members and friends. Same sentence. Can't support them, can't harm them. Got it? Okay. We no longer have that. It's all gone. It's all gone. Finance doesn't have to do that anymore. Ordination standards no longer say anything about self-avowed practicing homosexuals. Nothing in there in the ordination standard. That is gone. All the discriminatory language is gone. And that was something that we just really celebrated. I mean, there was rejoicing all over the floor of General Conference. Now, I think I said already that explicitly affirming language was not put in place of the restrictive language. And that was kind of hard. It was hard for me as a delegate not to vote yes on things that I wanted to vote yes on, but instead to vote no. That was a difficult thing to do. What was even harder was for LGBTQ people, the Gay Clergy Caucus and the Gay Delegate Caucus, to hear their friends and allies go to the microphone and speak against legislation that we all wanted in order to get back to point zero, to get back to neutral and to keep the big tent. But we all agreed to do that. So amidst some tears and some heartache, we agreed to do that. And I think that's part of how we got it done, was that we agreed to move together. Each section, can you jump a couple more slides?
Did I miss a couple? Okay.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I skipped a little bit too. Okay. So each section of the board of the Book of Discipline is voted on separately. So it would take the whole rest of the afternoon to tell you each individual piece of legislation. But what I want to end this section with is the consent calendar vote That's when you put a whole bunch of things together that the committee has agreed to and presented it to the plenary saying, the committee agreed to this, in many cases unanimously. Are you willing to go with the vote of the committee and not talk about it a long time on the floor of conference, okay? The consent calendar, removing incompatible with Christian teaching and the prohibition against self-avowed practicing homosexuals being ordained was approved. Next slide. 692 to 51. That was absolutely amazing. And you heard the speaker, one of the people being interviewed saying, without debate. Like without debate, we removed that stuff. It just went, it went away. We worked really carefully and prayerfully behind the scenes, and then it passed without debate. So there was a lot of joy. I want to point out this particular joy in particular. I don't know if you know these faces, but the woman on your right is Bishop Karen Olivito. She is the first openly lesbian bishop ever to be elected in the United Methodist Church. And since her election, her episcopacy has been challenged over and over repeatedly. There's been complaints, there's been charges, but her own jurisdiction won't play. They won't put her on trial because they elected her. In fact, they elected her on the first ballot. In fact, they elected her, maybe not the first ballot, but they elected her unanimously. People stepped down so that she could be elected, right? So her jurisdiction stood by her and she was never punished for anything, but she got a lot of complaints, a lot of, a lot of bad stuff, bad letters, hate mail, that kind of thing. This is her wife, Robin Reitmauer. And they've been married for a long time. And this is the first time that the church has acknowledged their marriage and said, you don't get kicked out just because you love someone of the same sex. So it was especially, I think, poignant for them and for others who've been in a similar situation. All right, priority number 2, you ready? Revision of the social principles. So what we do at General Conference every 4 years is revise the Book of Discipline. That is what we do. When you heard people in the lead up to this saying, are you going to change the Book of Discipline? Well, yeah, that's what we do every 4 years. That's what we do. That's why we come together, is to see how the Spirit is speaking to the church now and what changes need to be made. So of course we're going to change. And of course we're going to update the social principles. We do that every 4 years because the world changes, the world turns, different issues come up. Like we didn't used to, the social principles didn't used to have a whole kind of stuff about fossil free, carbon neutral, like none of that was in there, right? But it's made its way in because times change and we respond to that. The church responds to the times in which it lives. However, we've never had a huge overhaul, like the whole social principles, right? So we've edited and adapted and amended one at a time every 4 years, forever and ever. That's what we always do. But an overhaul of the whole thing has not happened of this magnitude. So that's what we wanted to do in this particular general conference. We have long worked with this ever expanding document called the Social Principles. It's in the Book of Discipline, but you can also buy it as a separate book. And the separate book gets longer and longer and longer every year as we add more and more and more stuff to it. This is the more recent, of course. It was published in 2016 for the 2017 to 20 quadrennium. So it's now out of date, but this is the most recent one we have. The parts of it, if you've never looked at these, it's divided into sections on the natural world, like the environment, the nurturing community, like the family, the social community, the economic community, the political community, and the world community. Those are the areas or the chapters, as it were, the sections of the social principles. Sometimes these every 4 year revisions make this document sound like it was written by 1,000 people in a room, because it was written by 1,000 people in a room. And if you know anything about group projects, right, it's messy. Sometimes you've got sections that disagree with each other. Sometimes you've got sections that repeat each other. Sometimes you've got sections that fit one part of the world but don't fit another. So I'm going to share a couple of examples with you. One is, you may or may not know this, but the Book of Discipline has always said no to gambling. Gambling, it says, here's the language, is a menace to society, deadly to the best interests of moral, social, economic, and spiritual life. If you go to the riverboat or whatever, don't even worry about it. But nothing happens to you. But the social principles are clear that we don't do that, okay? And you know that if you have ever tried to do a well-intentioned fundraiser through like a bingo night or a quilt raffle, and you've been told, no, United Methodists don't gamble, right? That's happened to some of you, you know what I'm talking about. So it's very clear what it says in the Book of Discipline, United Methodists don't do that. But United Methodists in Germany do. They just don't call it gambling. They call it something else, right? They are able to do what fits their culture, but it doesn't, but the book of discipline itself does not fit well, and they've had to make their own arrangements, okay? Another example is in the section of the social principles on criminal and restorative justice. The social principles make a point to speak up for those accused of wrongdoing by saying that for detainees who don't speak English, appropriate translation should always be provided, right? That's reasonable. That sounds good. We would agree with that, right? We want detainees to feel welcome and fairly treated. But what if you're in the French Congo and nobody speaks English? Well, then that paragraph doesn't make any sense for you, does it? So we have good, well-intentioned stuff in the social principles, but it doesn't apply to everybody. They're not global. They're written for us, and they're written about us in the United States. They're not global. So one of the intentions was to create a set of social principles that are truly global. Another purpose was to make them more succinct. I told you it gets longer and longer every time. The most recent social principles, that booklet that I showed you, is 63 pages long. That's a lot if you just want to know what the church believes about whatever, abortion or immigration or whatever. The revised social principles brought it down to 43 pages. Still pretty long, but much more manageable. This document reflects 12 years of cooperative work by international committee members, and then with input from over 1,000 United Methodists from all around the world. Finding mutually acceptable ways to express, this is what the social principles do, the ethical aspirations of the UMC in every place for the common good in our public policies and personal commitments, through which we love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and desire for our neighbors what we desire for ourselves. It's just, that's what the social principles are supposed to be about, not just kind of like an ongoing, ever-growing, unmanageable document. The executive committee, or the executive director of the group that put this together, called the revised social principles a love letter to our church to inspire us to be the beautiful, beloved community of God. I will confess I've never, ever thought of the social principles as a love letter. But if you think about it in the sense that its purpose is to call us toward more holy living toward one another and toward our planet, it really is kind of a love letter to and from the church, right? The third is, the purpose was to be more global, the purpose was to be more concise, and finally to be more theologically and scripturally grounded. Because that's important if you've got a church document. It does need to be, it's not just what I feel like, it's not just what I believe. It needs to be theologically and scripturally grounded. And so that's what we did, and we approved the United Methodist Revised Social Principles. Now, there was one sticky piece in the whole 43 pages of document. There was one sticky piece in the whole thing that we stopped and talked about for a little while that wasn't worked out ahead of time. And that was about the definition of marriage. Because the social principles does talk about the definition of marriage. I explained about it when I preached on May 12th. You might have been here, you might not have been. But essentially, there was a deep desire on the part of many United Methodists, including the committee that drafted the new language, to remove the portion of the social principles that define marriage as between one man and one woman, right? And there was an equally deep desire on the part of other delegates to maintain that language. That's probably no surprise to anybody. And that's not just international, that's within the United States as well. You know that. People that you know have different ideas of what marriage should look like. So we had strong desire to remove one man, one woman, and we had strong desire to maintain one man, one woman. And that was where we got in the sticky place before we could approve it. My assumption was that the controversy would be all centered on issues of heterosexuality and homosexuality, right? That the reason folks wanted so badly to keep that language was to restrict against same-sex marriage, whereas the desire to remove the language would be about affirming same-sex marriage. What was interesting to me is that what ended up rising to the surface is that the language of one man, one woman protects child marriage victims in Africa, where that is actually an issue. I didn't really think about that, but man and woman instead of child protects children. And one man and one woman protects against polygamy. Polygamy and child marriage are both real live issues in some parts of Africa that we don't have here. We don't think about that, or if we do have it, it's underground and we don't know about it. but they're real live issues in Africa. And they said, we cannot give up one man, one woman language. Maybe like this gentleman right here, specifically because of homo and heterosexuality. But for many delegates, it wasn't just about this, it was about children and it was about polygamy. Well, that's fascinating. And it turns out I wouldn't have known that if we hadn't slowed down and listened to each other and talked to each other. There were several times in the proceedings when we were in the plenary on the floor, when we would get like WhatsApp messages from our coalition, leaders. And one time, no, several times, the message came across, US white delegates, shut up and sit down, let the Central Conferences speak. I was like, oh, I kind of always thought if I had something important to say, I should get up and say it. Like my parents are watching on TV and they're gonna want to see me go to the microphone, right? Like we should all contribute. I'm gonna want to tell my church that I could, no. White American delegates, shut up and sit down and let the Central Conferences speak. And that's how we learned about polygamy and child marriage being such a big deal. And so that's how we were able to engage in dialogue rather than conflict, right? The purpose wasn't to win. The purpose wasn't to get more votes and get our way, even though I wanted to win and get more votes and get my way. I wanted that, but that wasn't the purpose we agreed on. We agreed to work together. And so when we listened to the Central Conference delegates and we heard about their concerns in Africa, we're like, oh, well then how can we make this work? We got to make this work somehow. What are we going to do? So we talked about it online, offline. We talked about it in the microphone and we talked about it on WhatsApp, right? And people are, sitting together and they're gathering people around their tables and they're talking, we're going to get this done. We're going to figure this out. In the end, a delegate from East Zimbabwe named Molly Moyera proposed an alternative. She proposed new language that would both retain the one man, one woman language and also pair it with more broadly defined language so that everybody could go home to their home conference and say, we approved two different definitions of marriage, we're using this one, okay? So I'm gonna tell you how the language turned out. I can't find it on my script, but it'll be up there, okay. Within the church, this is the new language now that Molly Moyera brought up. We affirm marriage as a sacred lifelong covenant that brings two people of faith, parentheses, one man and woman of consenting age, and two adult persons of consenting age, into union with one another and into deeper relationship with God and the religious community. Okay, you see what we did there? So we kept one man, one woman, but we added, of consenting age, because that was really important to the child marriage piece, and two adult persons. Now we had this funky little thing that happened. This is just the funny things that happen at General Conference. It's neither here nor there. Molly Moyera gave her proposal as a numbered list. So she had Anne, you see Anne, man behind Bishop Scholl's head. One man, one woman of consenting age, and then you can't see, but two adult persons of consent. So somebody said, so are we talking about a marriage of 4 people? No. So she had tried to list it as a numbered list, in which case and makes sense, but they had not recorded it as a numbered list. So we changed the word and for or. And in the changing of and to or, we won the day. We passed it. It was absolutely amazing. The revised social principles passed by over 76%. And okay, that's a miracle. I don't know if you know that, but that's a miracle. To have passed that kind of language in a global community like that is nothing short of miraculous. And it's because we shut up, sat down, and listened to each other, right? Because we worked together. All right. Priority number 3. Are you ready to move on to the next one? You still wait? Okay. Priority number 3 is regionalization. This is the most complicated piece of legislation that we did at General Conference, and it's also not over because it's going to have to go to the annual conferences. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But it relates to everything else. You're going to hear some repeated themes here. The United Methodist Church at its beginning, and you heard this in the video, was largely a US-based church with mission outposts in other areas of the world. So this means that our governance, our policy, our politics, really the majority of the book of discipline were conceived, composed, revised, and approved with the US in mind. Remember, I told you that our governance is really similar to the US Constitution because the UMC was being set up at about the same time as the USA. Well, so what does that mean? That means we have been intricately tied with the USA. And we have been very largely a US church with mission outposts in other places. So other countries outside the US were permitted to make adaptations as needed to fit their own context. And I gave some examples of those before. It's been a flexible model, but frankly, it's been a colonialist model where we're the center of the world and everybody else adapts to be like us or to not be like us. Therefore, the central conferences, now, by the way, when I say central conferences, that is the non-intuitive, counterintuitive term for conferences outside the United States. So I just said we're set up as though we're the center of the world, but ironically, the word for outside the United States is central conferences. So just try to bear that in mind, because I'm going to accidentally say that word over and over. The central conferences have been able to publish supplements. Can you see this in his hand? It says the Book of Discipline 2016 supplement. So this gentleman is from Denmark, and this is his Book of Discipline that adapts the Book of Discipline to Denmark, to his culture, right? The Northern European area is able to do that. They have the freedom to do that. There are actually 8 different books of discipline out there for different areas of the world who have the freedom and the right. I mean, it says in the discipline that they have the freedom and the right to adapt to their own culture. So that's wonderful. That's a really good way to do things, but we don't have that right. We're still the center of the world. So everything that's voted on applies to us. They can go back and change it. And I don't mean that so flippant. I mean, there's only some things can be adapted. Only some things can be changed. I really don't need to suggest that they all go back and do whatever they want, because that's totally not true. But they can make changes in their Book of Discipline, in their supplement to fit their context. So for example, and I think I gave this example in church, there are lots of places in Africa that do not have a United Methodist seminary. So in our Book of Discipline, we have some pretty stringent rules and expectations for clergy. I could not be here without an MDiv, right? I had to get my MDiv, I had to do my clinical pastoral education, I had to be approved by the board of administrators, whatever, right? You have to do these things. Well, if you don't have a United Methodist seminary where you live, you can't be expected to do that. So their pastors don't necessarily have MDivs. Their pastors don't necessarily have master's degrees at all. Their pastors have what they have and it's good enough. You know, it's okay. They affirm what they've got and they're glad for what they've got. I don't mean that disparagingly at all. What I'm trying to say is the rules we set for ourselves don't always apply to everybody else, okay? So, I didn't realize, by the way, that there were so many books of discipline. I didn't know that till 2012. Somebody said, don't you, that they have, what? We're all following the same rules here? Well, what is that about? Okay, so the idea is to make a global book of discipline that does apply to everyone, and then have all the areas of the world be equal different regions who could all adapt the global book. Well, wouldn't have to adapt the global book, but they would have their own supplement for their own area. The problem is we're not a region. The US doesn't have a region, right? I showed you the breakdown of the, like, we've got charge conference, annual conference, jurisdictional conference, general. There's no national. There's no US conference. There is no level at which we can do US only business. So all US only business is done on the global level. They have to sit through stuff that doesn't apply to them. They vote on us. We don't vote on their supplements. It's colonial. It's unequal. It's not ideal. It doesn't lead us in the direction that we want to go. And so for that reason, for all those reasons, it was decided that we needed a global book of discipline and we need regionalization to put the US on parity with everybody else. Now, I'll give you one example that you can already get to on your own, which is one example of where this has been needed is with the struggle for LGBTQ equality, right? The US, it showed back in 2019, you saw that map of, the rejection of the traditional plan, right? It was sweeping, it was more than 2/3 of the nation. By this point, because we've had so many disaffiliations, it's probably 85, 90%, I don't know how much, but a huge portion of the United Methodist Church in the US is for full inclusion. But that's not true necessarily of other countries. Some other countries, yes, and some other countries, no. Some other countries are so far ahead of us, like Germany, went ahead and blessed same-sex marriage in 2022. They just took their own vote in November and said, we're done with this. This is ridiculous. And so they just passed their own supplement and they said, Germany just said, we're done with this. We're going to treat gay and lesbian people equally with straight people as far as marriage. But other countries are on the other direction of us and have said, we can't do that. We can't, that won't work in our culture. Therefore, when we pass legislation at general conference, it applies to us But then Germany can go home and change their thing, right? But we're still bound by it. So one of the places that has pushed the US to agree with the idea of regionalization, it's just one piece, but that would allow the US to be able to make its own judgment on inclusion and equality without having to have everybody else agree, okay? But it mostly came from the inequality that I was talking about, where we have been the center of the world for so long, it disadvantages everybody. So the legislation was actually proposed not by the US at all. The legislation came from 3 different bodies who worked together to figure out what would benefit whom, how it might, this is a team that was working on regionalization, to restructure our worldwide church to create 4 equal regions, okay? So the 4 regions would be the US, Africa, Philippines, and Europe, rather than having the US be the center of the hub, okay? We voted to decentralize the US and put America on par with everybody else. And you heard one of the speakers say, we don't want anybody at the center of the church except Jesus Christ. We don't want the US at the center of the church. We want Jesus Christ at the center of the church. So the legislation, can you do the next one? The legislation came from these 3 bodies that you see across the top. I'm not going to explain what those are unless you're really interested. But the Connectional Table, Standing Committee on Central Conference Relations, and the Christmas Covenant were all largely central conference outside the US organizations. Independently, they all came up with regionalization plans, and then they put their heads together and sent to the General Conference which one they wanted passed. So they also did a collaboration and said, okay, we've all got our own pets, but we're going to sacrifice for the greater good. None of us is going to fight for our own piece of legislation. We're going to put it all together, and we would like you all to vote for the Standing Committee one. So we did. We voted for the Standing Committee one, and it passed by 78% on the 3rd day of conference, which is also unheard of. That something that huge and that monumental passes by that much. Let me say something about why 78% is important. Because this involves not just a position or a practice of the United Methodist Church, but its very nature, because it's shifting us from like a colonial, we're the center and everybody else is satellite, to a parity model. It's so different, it's so radically different at the root of who we are structurally, that it requires constitutional changes. Okay, so think back to, like, in the United States, we've got laws that can be changed, but if you're gonna change the Constitution, that's a big honking deal, right? You need a lot more votes, it has to go through a whole lot more people. In the same way, if we're gonna change our Constitution, which regionalization does, we had to have at least a 2/3 majority. And here's the part that's still coming up. And it has to be ratified by the annual conferences. So I'll be going to annual conference in a week and a half. And our annual conference, actually, I think we're not going to vote this year, but next year. But every annual conference in the entire world has to vote on the regionalization. Every vote counts. Every person who votes counts. And after all the annual conferences in the whole world have met, they count all the votes, all the people who voted, and 2/3 of those people have to have approved it as well for it to be ratified, because it affects everyone. Anyway, but let me go back to this, because that's a couple of years from now. We're going to work on that. We'll work on that. The reason 78% is a big deal is because it had to pass by at least 2/3 majority, which clearly it did, right? That's fine. But we had an issue with this general conference. We have issues with every general conference, people not able to get their visas. Never, ever, ever does every single delegate from other countries get to come. There's always some issue with visa somewhere. We're always missing 10, 20 something delegates. This year, we were missing more delegates than usual. There's a whole lot of reasons for that, which I'll tell you if you're really interested, but it doesn't matter. The point is, we were missing a number of delegates. And so there was a lot of concern that opponents to regionalization, who are mostly leftover WCA people who stuck around just kind of long enough to make themselves known and try to convince more people to disaffiliate, would accuse us of passing stuff just because those people couldn't come. In other words, saying, you made it impossible for some of these Africans to come, and that's what, and because they couldn't come, they didn't get to vote, and that's how you passed your stuff. We were expecting those kinds of accusations, that kind of finger pointing, just because we were passing things that not everybody agreed with, right? Well, we did the math. All of us did the math because we all wanted to be sure. And even if every single missing delegate came and voted no, we still would have had 66% and more. So That's why that number is important. Not only did it pass with flying colors, but it would have passed no matter who had attended. It's a clear pass. Everybody wanted regional. It's only fair. It's decolonizing the church. Everybody wanted that. So that was really good. All right. So the other reason the vote margins are important is because in past general conferences, I told you what happened in 2019, how close that was. Many past general conferences have had some of the more controversial pieces of legislation pass or be defeated by, 55, 45, 49, 51, really close margins, which just breaks half the church's hearts, right? It represents a divided church that's not talking to each other, that's not listening to each other, that's pushing for votes instead of for compromise and communication with each other. Slim margins are just not good. It just doesn't reflect well on the sharing and the communication of the church. The wide margins that we had at this general conference were fantastic. This was not about progressives like barely edging our way across the line, right? It was not about US delegates defeating everybody else because this is our last year to be the majority. This was about all of us working together, learning to talk to each other, forming community, having conversation, listening to each other, praying with each other, collaborating with each other, and really just changing just the spirit of general conference. So I know I've already said this twice, but people kept stopping people in the hall saying, is this really general conference? Like, can you believe this? Does this feel like any other general conference you've ever been to? And the answer is no. None of us had ever been to one like this. It was wonderful. It was joy. Now, we don't all agree on everything, right? But overall, it was joyful, supportive, fun, and we had really a fantastic time. It was great. All right. I am getting ready to move away from legislation, although at the end, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of like 10 more things that we passed really quick that just might be interesting to you. But I'm getting ready to move from the 3 R's into just some lighter stuff. Do you have any questions about the 3 R's before I move?
Okay. The committee that they built to make the revised social principles, did they try to make it representative of the various countries? Is that part?
Yeah. Yeah, so Maggie's asking, the group that did the revised social principles, which is the General Board of Church and Society, they worked very hard at international intercultural representation. They had input from 1,000 people from all around the world. And we're also supposed to take it back and like teach it to our people. And like, I'm supposed to do a class on it. We're all supposed to share it and then take feedback. So if we need to make more changes, we can do that. Yes, definitely, Barb.
Now that we have regionalization, will the general conference be held in other countries?
Oh, now that we have regionalization, will general conference be held in other countries? Excellent question. Okay, so first of all, we don't quite have it yet because we have to get it ratified by, okay, whatever. So it still might not pass. However, yes, and also technically before COVID, this conference, this is the 24, so 2020 was supposed to be in Minneapolis. All of our original books have these great maps of Minneapolis. Well, they had to get rid of those because we weren't even in Minneapolis. We were in Charlotte, so that was no good. And we ended up being in Charlotte. But the 24 conference was supposed to be in the Philippines. And the 28 conference was supposed to be in Zimbabwe. Now, COVID shut everything down, changed everything. Not all cultures and areas are able to host that many people. And then if you go to someplace like the Philippines, for example, where a small number of people, a small number of delegates is in the Philippines, and a large number of people are outside the Philippines, air travel and visas are so much more complicated. To have it in the US is by far the simplest, but yes, but not just because of regionalization. Yes, we will have it outside the US, but not just because of regionalization. We'll also, though, have a regional conference in the US for just US matters. It will be wonderful. That means general conference will not have to be 10 days straight, right? It will be shorter, cheaper, lots more fun.
How often do we have regional? Yeah.
How often will we have regional conference? I don't know. I don't know. And the other thing I don't know is, will we still have jurisdictions if we have the US as a regional conference? Because a history that, I'm not going to get into it all here, but the history of the jurisdictional conferences is actually also wrapped up in colonialism and racism. And for non-white people, there's still a sting that goes on with just the concept of jurisdictions. I don't know what to compare it to, but the history is not pretty. It's not good optics or anything else. So it may be that someday we get rid of jurisdictions and just have the region, or we may have both. I don't know. Any other questions about the 3 Rs? Mark?
Thinking about how you all were voting, whether you were thinking of all the implications of this, because I've often said that the schism over LGBTQ inclusion was in a sense the revenge of colonialism. And so I'm wondering now, as we recognize that the schism has cost us about 20 to 25% of all churches, that means the budget for the national church will be significantly smaller.
48% less.
So we have to, frankly face the fact that this is going to impact general boards and agencies, seminaries, the capacity of us to do mission. So many areas now. It's such a high cost we pay for this.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and I don't know if you understood exactly what he meant by the revenge of colonialism, but that's right. When folks have gone, for example, to some of the African leadership and said, how come we can't get LGBTQ equality, going over here? And they said, you taught us this. You taught us one man, one woman when you came over and colonized our people and made us all be Christian. Where do you think we got this? We got it from you. Now you're going to take it back and say it wasn't true after all, right? That's a little oversimplified, but that conversation has happened. Colonialism does come back to bite you. That's right. And as a result of this schism, splintering, division, whatever you want to call it, we have lost about 20, 25, maybe 25% of the churches in the United States. Now, Illinois, not nearly so many. Bloomington, normal, none. We've lost some individual families, but no churches. But it depends on where you are. The Southeast jurisdiction has been decimated, right? Areas in Texas, like one entire annual conference of Texas tried to disaffiliate. Annual conference can't disaffiliate, but it tried, and a whole bunch of those churches left. So it really has affected the overall church. It has affected the budget. It has affected mission. And those are some losses that we have to figure out how to take. Passing the budget this year was hard. It was hard because whenever you have declining resources, everybody gets less, and the things that mean the most to you aren't getting supported the way that they used to, including, like you said, MEF funds for seminaries, for education, missions. Those are really hard discussions to have. And I will tell you, it helps a lot if you have learned to collaborate and have conversation with each other and everybody's sacrificing at once. So one place that played out for me, this is not in my presentation, but I'm on the Episcopacy Committee, right, for our jurisdiction. And our jurisdiction has had 9 bishops for the last several years. We know because of declining membership that we're going to get cut down to 7. The Episcopal fund that pays the Episcopal leader, that pays the bishop's salaries, is being reduced. And so we're only going to have 7. Well, so then we get to General Conference, and all 5 jurisdictional episcopacy committees meet together, right? There's 5 jurisdictions. Everybody who's on the jurisdictional episcopacy committee is on the interjurisdiction. So we all meet together. And the first thing that happens is they say, okay, y'all, we're gonna have to cut down from 39 bishops to 32 in the United States. Who's willing to give up 1? We're like, well, we're already giving up 2, so that wouldn't be us, right? The West is like, oh, we've been without 2 already, so it wouldn't be us. Southeast is saying, whoa, we already didn't have as many bishops as we were allotted, so it wouldn't be us. All 5 of us are like, oh, not us. So we met every blessed day until finally, on like the 4th day, we got together in our little groups and we all came back and said, okay, we can give up 1. Okay, we can give up 2. All right, we'll help, right? And we, across the United States, figured out how to reduce by 7 bishops. Now, some of those are to retirement. Some of those are people who are retiring that just won't be replaced. But 2 jurisdictions, including ours, is going to have to literally give up a bishop and send them somewhere else, because the Northeast gets a new one and the West gets a new one. And we're not electing anymore. So we, and I've already forgotten which other jurisdiction, is going to have to send a bishop to another. Whoa, we've never done that before. There's provision for it in the book of discipline, but we don't know how to do it. We've never transferred a bishop across jurisdictional lines. But, You know, we're learning new things, because on the fourth day, maybe it was the third day, that would be more biblical. We all came back and said, all right, we'll sacrifice. It won't be easy for us. You know, we were like, hey, we're already picking up too. It's taken us 2 years to figure out how to put East and West Ohio together and put Northern Illinois with Wisconsin, because Northern Illinois can't get along with the rest of Illinois. It's taken us 2 years to figure that out. Don't expect us to do one just like this, and then it takes place in September, and there's like, that's ridiculous. That everybody else was in the same boat. Every jurisdiction was in the same boat. So little by little, we all came back to the circle and said, all right, we'll take a cut. And that's what happens when you work together, right? It was kind of miraculous, actually. That was kind of miraculous too, to see that happen.
Well, I have a question that went way back to the beginning.
You were talking about we met together before
We did.
general
Yes, we
conference
did.
to figure out how to work together. And I wondered what you meant by we.
Okay.
What did I mean by we? Okay, so here's the miracle of modern technology. You can call it WhatsApp, you can call it Zoom, you can call it whatever you want. But by the miracle of modern technology, put together with the miracle of collaboration, we figured out who was going to be on our legislative committees and started meeting in our legislative committees ahead of time. So there were 15 legislative committees. Mine was Faith and Order. We had our first meeting in November by Zoom. We got to know each other. We prayed for each other. We built a little bit of trust. We talked about priorities. The next time we met, we talked about the 3 R's and said, the coalition would like to pass the 3 R's. Those are our top priorities. We, Faith and Order, and really all the legislative committees, but we, Faith and Order, we've got some other stuff on our list. None of it is as important as the 3 R's. So, for example, if you were at my pre-general conference meeting, I talked a little bit about this document called Sent in Love, which was this theological document about the mission of the church and how we're sent and love. It's really beautiful, but that was not a priority because the priority was the 3 R's, okay? So from November, and then it was a little sketchy in 23, but once 2024 started, all 15 legislative committees were meeting regularly to go through the legislation in advance, to find out what the issues were, to identify catches and places that things might not go well or areas that we might have to compromise with each other, to think ahead of time about amendments. Because while 10 days is a long time, 10 days is not a long time, right? And if you have serious work to do, let's say that your committee has like 40, 50, 60 pieces of legislation, you want time to work on that and not have to do it all on the floor with perfect strangers. And yet that's how general conferences always works. You meet with total strangers, you barely get to know each other, and you start voting right away. But we started building those relationships and working ahead of time. So my Faith and Order legislative committee met, I don't know, 6 or 7 times before general conference, and we had worked our way through all the legislation. Now, let me say, because of some of those visa issues that I mentioned to you before that kept a lot of delegates from being able to attend, and also because of other reasons that I simply don't understand, we were not successful at connecting with Central Conference delegates that way. Okay, so unfortunately, it was only the US coalition members that were able to meet ahead of time. We didn't have the names, we didn't have the contact information, we didn't have a way to get them involved. So that's unfortunate and unfair because it would have been even so much better to start with that ahead of time. But B, none of the pre-work could be seen as definitive. We couldn't really vote on anything. It wasn't official and it wouldn't have been fair. So for example, and I'm going to show you in a later photo about the leadership of each legislative team. We were to elect leaders. People on the Zoom calls could put themselves up and say, I'd like to serve as a blah, blah, blah. In fact, I did. I said, I'd like to serve as the secretary. And I made my little speech and I explained why I'd like to be the secretary of my legislative committee. We all did that. And then we did some pre-work to say, let's look at these folks as good contenders for those positions, but we can't fill all the positions prematurely, both because that's illegal, but also because we don't have any Central Conference delegates here. And we're not going to elect all leadership with no Central Conference delegates. We're not. That's not fair. And that's not the kind of church we want to be. So every legislative committee did some sort of sample elections just to kind of get ready how it might turn out. But every single one of us held space for Central Conference delegates to make sure that we didn't have an entirely American slate of leadership, which is how it's always been in the past, because we're all been colonialists, right? We learned some stuff. We learned some stuff. Mark asked me early, before the meeting started, I'm curious why things went so much better this time. And I have a whole bunch of reasons, right? One is being able to talk to each other. One is working in advance. One is, because the really, really difficult people had already disaffiliated and left. I mean, sorry to say difficult people, but I mean like the really loud people who were always at the mic, always saying really fairly harsh and sometimes offensive things, like they all left. I mean, so that's just how that was, right? But honest to goodness, one of the main reasons that things got passed and the margins were so good this year is because the Americans sat down, shut up and listened. And we're not used to doing that. But we learned how to do that, and it makes a ton of difference because it turns out United Methodists in other countries are really smart. And they have really good things to say, and they're faithful in ways that we're not. We have a lot to learn from them. So if we will stop not trusting anybody but ourselves, we can do a whole lot better. And that's what we did, and that's how. So lots of reasons, but that was one. That was a long answer. I forgot what the question was. Did that answer your question? Okay, and then some. All right, let's move on because I want to make sure you have plenty of time for questions. I want to talk about gifts and graces, otherwise known as hospitality and generosity. All around, this is the lighter part, just a little looser, okay? All over the convention center were these volunteers in red aprons. Anybody in a red apron was hospitality, and they were all amazing. They didn't all hug everybody, but they did show you around, they hold your stuff, they showed you where the bathrooms were, they helped you with questions, they'd run get things for you. They were absolutely fantastic, wonderful people. Another thing that's kind of fun about General Conference is there's always little gifts. And you get gifts as delegates. It's one of the perks, I guess, of being a delegate. So we got these backpacks. They're pretty good, actually, sturdy backpacks. United Women in Faith. I don't know if you can see these cards, but Native United Women in Faith handmade these little pins, these beaded pins for us, and every delegate got a beaded pin. Isn't that cool? Really nice. This was this year. In past years, we've gotten prayer beads.
I'm sorry.
Prayer beads that were handmade for us, prayer shawls, these scarf things that were hand tie-dyed for us. Now, side note, we had a little bit of suspicion that these were handed out to everybody to keep us from wearing the rainbow scarves. You know, to say like, let's not have that divisive clothes wearing, let's all match, but they were really beautiful, and so we did wear them, but sometimes we wore both, okay? So in past years, there's always nice little gifts. It's always really nice. So, and this year, here's another one. We got these little altar in a bag. We got these little bags that had a stone and a cross and a little piece of cloth and a candle, you know, that we could put in our space so that our workspace was altar space to remind us that it's holy work, right? It's legislative work, but it's holy work, and we needed to be reminded of that. But then we also got some fun stuff. Sometimes there were fun gifts that came along. Like one day, the General Commission on Goldfish Distribution Relations, which is not a real thing, GCGOR, seems like, or DR, you know all the acronyms, we have so many. You heard people talk about COSRO and GCNS and GBF and H, right? So the GCGDR gave us a little bag of goldfish saying, hope your plenary goes swimmingly. Another day, the coalition gave us Legos. Every single seat got a little baggie of Legos, not enough Legos to build anything on by yourself, but if you got together with other people at your table, you could make something. So as we build a renewed, revived, and reclaimed United Methodist Church, it will include many colors, shapes, and sizes. What can you build with those around you? And then it says, post your creation at #WeBuildItTogether.com or whatever. So we started passing around our Legos and adding them to each other. And the little Lego thing became a home for my little bear. I want to tell you about my bear. This was a little gifty that was given me here at Wesley before I left. On the Sunday before I left, Kelsey gathered folks around me for a prayer, which just meant so much to know that you all were with me. I can't even tell you how much that meant. But second service, as everyone was returning to their seats, one of our little girls in the second service, whose name is Bryn, came up to me and pressed this into my hand. And I didn't even know what it was until she'd gotten back to her seat, and I looked and it was a little bear. And I just said, I'm going to bring him with me, and he's going to be with me every day. And he was. He was on my discipline. Pay attention. No, not that one, the previous one. Oh, no, that's right, it is that one, You're right.
Okay.
This is in the next picture. This picture is another fun thing. We had a lot of bishops. If you read the For Junkies Only thing, you'll read some of the historic firsts of historic bishops. This is the first Puerto Rican bishop we have ever had, and so he presided over one. But as he was presiding, he said, I have up here something that was given to me because everybody needs a little Jesus. Little Jesus. So we all got a little Jesus. So we had something, and then the next one is a picture of my little bear, right? Yeah. There's my little bear. So, there's fun things at conference too, including worship. So I have to say, worship is quite possibly the best thing about General Conference ever, 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 ever. You have never been to worship like at General Conference. They pull out all the stops, people from all around the world. Now, African University Choir was not able to come this time because why? Visas. But the Congo choir came, the Philippines choir, it was amazing. Opening worship was just really, really powerful. The procession for opening worship, it featured diversity and inclusion of differing abilities. And that was sort of a running theme as well. Persons of all, right? Ages, races, colors, tribes, language groups, sexual orientations, gender identities, physical abilities, economic, just unbelievable worship, unbelievable. It's just moving every single time. I don't even know how to tell you how wonderful it was. And possibly my very favorite worship service was opening worship on the last day, which closed with this amazing song. I think this video will play.
Mm-hmm.
That never happened at General Conference before. I'm not saying we never had fun, or we never danced, or we never clapped, or enjoyed worship, but that kind of thing has never happened at General Conference before. And it was wonderful. I'm just saying, you set me to a good place. Wonderful. All right. I'm just about at my last bit. Just a few more sort of details, and I'm going to stop talking at 3:30, so if you have questions, you can ask them. All right. A bit about delegates. Delegates from all over the world, as you know, about 44% of them are from outside the United States. Right now, 56% are from the United States, 32% from Africa, 6% from the Philippines, 4.5% from Europe, and the rest from concordant, autonomous affiliated. Like, for example, I met a bishop and his assistant from Bolivia at the airport. And we had a delightful conversation. This was his first time. He'd never been to the US before. He'd never been to General Conference before. He would have voice but not vote, because there's a Methodist Church of Bolivia, not the United Methodist Church of Bolivia. But lots of Mexico, lots of places like that. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. The largest delegations, if you're curious, are from North Katanga, that's in Congo. They had 50 delegates. Côte d'Ivoire, or Ivory Coast, had 32 delegates. The largest delegations in the US, just FYI, are from Virginia and North Georgia. They each have 22. You see, the church is growing in these areas of Africa, and it's not growing here in the United States. Most of the conferences in Europe and the Philippines have 2 delegates. A couple of conferences in the US have 2 delegates. We had 10. We had 5 clergy and 5 lay. I may have said this before, but at general, jurisdictional, and annual conference, there's an equal number of clergy and laity. Okay, pastors and non-pastors, or whatever you want to call them, clergy and laity, have exactly the same vote. They're exactly equal, and so we had 5 and 5 plus alternates. Could you go to the next one? So this is our delegation. plus our bishop minus Christina, who was always out getting coffee. But this is our voting delegation. This is where we sat. We sat in the same place every time, and we sat in the same seats every time. I don't know if this is interesting to you, but Paul was first elected laity. He always sat there, and I, as first elected clergy, always sat next to him. And then second elected laity, and then second elected clergy, and then third elected laity. We always sit in the same place. And if you're going to leave, you have to move heaven and earth and get an act of Congress to get off the floor. I traded off with one friend one time because there was some legislation she really cared about. And she said, please, 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 can I be on the floor? And she was our first alternate. So I waited till revised social principles was done because I had to vote on that. And then we quick went. But here's what you have to do to get off the floor and trade out. You have to get a pink slip that you fill out in triplicate. And then you have to go with your head of delegation. So Paul and I had to walk all the way across the room together to the other desk. I had to turn in my voting card. She had to get a voting card. We both had to show our picture IDs, like our driver's licenses. Both had to sign the form, and then she could come in for me. So it was a really big deal. You can't just be absent, right? Your presence matters and your vote matters. And you can't just have somebody show up on the floor for you. It's not even like volleyball, where you just go up and like, you know, touch hands and then whatever. No, you have to go through, you have to sign away your firstborn child. Okay. So these are our reserves, our alternate delegates. So the one who subbed in for me is in the green. Anytime if you wanted to get out she was the first elected, or the next elected clergy, lay people can sub in for lay people. If she was subbing in and somebody else, another clergy wanted to leave, you go to the next alternate. So we have these now. Yeah, that's fine. No, it's okay. So these are our alternates. But you can't be on the floor if you're not a voting delegate, right? So this curtain separates the bar of the conference from the not bar of the conference. We called it the borderlands. And we met there at the borderlands every morning for prayer, our delegation. And they could not cross over to us and we could not cross over to them, just like, you know, Abraham and Lazarus, they cannot cross over. So the ones of us on this side are the voting delegates, plus the bishop who doesn't vote. And the ones on the other side are there to sub in for us, or sometimes bring us coffee. Mike Crawford, who's the taller gentleman with not very much hair and the glasses in the checked shirt, he's our district superintendent. But at general conference, he went and got me hot water for my tea. It was so nice. Because I couldn't leave the floor and he'd go get me hot water. So anyway, so that was our morning routine.
There on the previous slide.
Yep.
Just a couple of.
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to go that fast. So do you recognize anybody else in this picture? Eric Slingerland, right? He's a member of our church. He's a candidate for ministry and he's a seminary student at Wesley Theological Seminary in DC. So again, he's standing next to Mike Crawford, who's our superintendent, all of ours. Front and center is Jenny Edwards Bertrand. She's the pastor at Hope United Methodist Church. We had kind of an overrepresentation of Bloomington normal people. The sort of reddish hair person, her name is Sydney Pappas, and she's at First United Methodist Church of Springfield. She's on staff there. Susan Connor is from Danville. She's in the front with the grayish hair. And Beth Fender is one of the few deacons in our conference. I'm going to tell you in a minute what piece of legislation she really wanted to be on, but she is on our conference staff as director of, can't remember what it's called. Can't remember what it's called, darn it. Anyway, she's a member of our conference and a deacon. Thank you. All right. Other famous people. You recognize anybody in this picture? Adam Hamilton stopped by to see Eric Slingerland and Sydney. He's the friendliest person. Like seriously, for all his like fame and stuff, he stops by and he gives you his full attention and he asks your name and then he remembers it. He remembers my name. It's weird. Anyway, it's really good. If you're in the adult Sunday school class, you might recognize the gentleman on the left. That's Tom Berlin, who was not a bishop when we did his study in the adult Sunday school class, but he's a bishop now. So he used to be able to vote, now he can't, right? He used to be a delegate, now he's a bishop. And then on my right is Magre de Vega, your right. He helped organize our Faith and Order Legislative Committee and sat right down the road from me, but he organized our Advent study. If you were here at Wesley and did the Advent study, he was a part of that, and you're gonna see a couple more faces of people who were part of that Advent study. April Kasperson on the right, she was part of the Advent study. Curtis Brown is our director of connectional ministries in the conference. Eric Swanson is a fellow pastor, he's a deacon. Recognize this guy? We've done a couple of his studies. Women's Bible study, you might know him. His name's Matt Rawl. Yeah, he was in the Advent study, and he also did the Grinch study, Christmas study, and the Scrooge Christmas study. If you're in Women's Bible study, you might remember him. And then Lana's not exactly famous, but I know some of you UWF ladies just saw and heard her recently at a missionary conference. She's been a missionary to Tanganyika in the Congo, but she's also been a friend of mine since college. And so we had lunch together. And so those are famous people that I got to run into at General Conference. Because we have so many different, now it gets all scattered. Now I've got lots of random topics all just patched together. Lots of different countries, lots of different languages, lots of different interpreters. There are 4 official. What's his name? Great. That's awesome. Chuck Sheldon, good. The 4 official languages of the General Conference, by which I mean the languages into which all the legislation is translated, okay, are English, French, Portuguese, and Swahili. But there are people who speak other languages like Portuguese. You heard somebody say Portuguese. Oh, that's one of the officials. But there are Russian, Korean, Spanish, German, Tagalog, Philippines, and ASL are other languages for which there are interpreters. So it's not all the legislation is translated into Korean, but if you only speak Korean, you can have a translator who will go with you to all your legislative committees and sit with you and translate, or in this case, ASL. This year, there was a queer delegate caucus for the first time. There have always been queer delegates, right? But they didn't always identify themselves for obvious reasons, right? Because they didn't want to be yelled at or judged or whatever. But this year, they all had buttons, QDC, and they wore them proudly, and they hung out together. So that was a new, inclusion was kind of a big deal in this conference. I showed you in opening worship, the inclusion of persons of differing abilities and disabilities. These 2 people are the monitor, the chair of monitoring. You heard somebody in the video talk about being a monitor. I'm going to tell you what that is. On your left is the monitor from General Commission on Religion and Race. On your right is the monitor from the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women. They are both monitoring the General Conference to see who gets to speak, who gets called on, how long do they get to speak, are they listened to, are they treated with respect, who is presiding, are they respected, are they honored, how much time do they get at the mic? And they're looking for male, female, non-binary. They're also looking for different races, different languages.
Is that new this year?
No, they've always done monitoring, but I feel like we've never paid attention as well this year. Like we really cared this year. I in legislative committee and in the plenary, even when we didn't get messages on WhatsApp, I felt white people around me sitting and saying, just because I have something to say doesn't mean I have to take up the time. Just because I have something, maybe somebody else has something to say. And the proportion of people from other nations, cultures, blah, 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 including people who identified as non-binary, that's new. That's never happened before. Was just much more balanced this year, much more balanced than I had ever seen it before. So go back for just one quick. So I told you I was on the Faith and Order Legislative Committee. There's these 15 legislative committees. And after all the legislative committees had done their elections, they all turned in their election results to the monitors, who then created this pie chart to show how we had done electing leadership of legislative committees. Are you with me? Does that all make sense what I'm saying? Just the words I'm saying? Okay. So we did pretty good. In the past, it's been a lot of white people with a handful of representative Black people. But we had all different kinds of people. We really worked hard at, now still, white people still outnumber everybody else. There's a lot better than we've had in the past, and partly because every legislative committee made a point to hold space for Central Conference delegates. So, okay, now the next one. This is my legislative committee. So I told you I had raised my hand and offered on Zoom. I said, like, I'd like to be a secretary, but then we already had a white woman. So I stepped out. I took myself out of the running because we already had a white woman in our leadership. And instead of me, Alka, right in the middle, was elected. She's an immigrant from India. anyway, it was really good. We were really intentional about that. And I wasn't the only person who withdrew from running because there was already somebody that looked like me. And we need different kinds of gifts. This, the young woman on the right, this is her first time to General Conference. She's biracial, young adult. She's in her like early 20s, and she was fantastic. She ended up being the legislative committee for our subcommittee, and I said to her, you know, I didn't get elected, or I stepped out of secretary, but if you want me to be your secretary, I would do that. She said, no, I think I can handle it. And I was like, this is my 5th General Conference. I'll be happy to help you out. I'll just, she didn't need me at all. And at the end of it, I went to her, you know, I'm sorry, I underestimated you. You rock, and you didn't need me. And that was fantastic. We were all ready to help each other, but it wasn't always needed. So anyway, I just wanted to show you the faces of our subcommittee because we worked hard on that. In the back, Lisa Schultz-Milling. Lisa Schultz-Milling. Okay. Yeah, she was good. And she's bilingual too, so that helped. Yeah. Okay. For all our work in inclusion, this is sort of one sad piece, is that there was also self-exclusion. This is the bishop, Edward Kige, is the bishop of Ukraine and Russia. I cannot imagine what his life has been like for the last however many years. I mean, I can't even imagine what it's like to be him. Nobody knows exactly whether it's because of political pressure, whether he is being told that they have to disaffiliate, or whether that's his own conviction. Like, I don't know, so I don't even want to guess. But we gave permission to Russia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan to leave the United Methodist Church and form autonomous denominations. That was just sad. Like, we didn't really want to say goodbye. We really want the Big Tent. We want people to stay. And nobody really knows whether they want to leave or not, because politically things are just different over there. But these are 2 Russian delegates that I've seen every year at General Conference. The last 5 General Conferences I've seen them. And it was just sad. Like, not everybody can be included, not always because of their own desire, right? So that was kind of a sad moment that we had. Okay, other random stuff, technology. We don't vote with little pieces of paper anymore, only show of hands, thanks be to God. We have these voting devices. In the past, we had voting devices that we were to keep with us. And so when you go into the room, like, you pull it out of your bag and you do your voting device and whatever, but it turns out you can hand off your voting device to somebody else. That's a thing that can happen. And that happened in 2019, is there were 4 people voting that shouldn't have been voting. And they somehow got a hold of somebody else. I don't know what happened exactly, but that's not supposed to happen. So they were very, very careful with security and that kind of thing this year. So we all had these little cards. You see my card with my name on it. It has my delegate number. It says what legislative committee I'm on and that I have voice and vote. And I carry it with me in my name tag and I plug it into my device. And that's how I vote, but 1 for yes and 2 for no. That's how we voted. And your device stayed at your seat, or they picked it up and charged it overnight and then put it back at your seat the next day. It didn't matter what device you had, as long as you had your card. Yeah, the device stayed when Beth replaced me, but I had to take my card out and I had to hand it over. I had to give it to the people at the desk, and I didn't get it again until I came back on the floor. Because I can't vote twice. You know, I mean, I can't be in 2 places. Yeah, so they were careful. We all had a name tag that not only had our photo on it, that was new this year, so that you, like, are you who you say you are? Before you got on you had to stop at the gate and they scan your QR code and a picture shows up on the computer and they look to see if your picture matches and they look to see if your number matches, and you don't get on the floor until you have passed all that stuff. Because they're making sure only people are there who's supposed to be there. You can also, this explains how we vote. This explains if you want to speak. So imagine if you want to make a motion and there's 775 people on the floor and you're just trying to get the bishop's attention. In the past, including like when I first started, you had these like red, green, whatever cards and you hold them up and you'd be like, but you can't go to the microphone until you're called on. So if you're like my height, or if you're in a dark area of the room, or you're in the back of the room, you never get seen, you never get called on. So now we have these ways where you can indicate on your voting device that you want to speak. So you push the little microphone and you say that you want to speak, and they can identify you. And then You have to say what you're gonna do. Because if a speech against is in order and you want to speak for, you're not gonna get called on. So you save a lot of time with the bishops calling people to the mic who have no business being there, because that's not where we are, if you've ever done legislation, right? Point of order, you get right on through, that's like triage at the emergency room, you go straight in. But everything else, you only get in if it's appropriate for you to get in. So the bishops call on you based on that, and they also have your demographic information a little bit, so they know if you're clergy or lay, so that they can do inclusion and diversity. So they don't call all on clergy people, right? Clergy people are really comfortable with the microphone. We get up and go to the microphone easily because we do this all day, every day. We're coming, sometimes lay people are not. So that could wind up with inequality of only clergy people talking. That's not good. So they make a point to alternate, like clergy and lay, different annual conferences, different genders, different areas of the country or the world. Yeah. Really interesting how technology helped us. Additional legislation, this is quick. I'm not even gonna take any time. Let's just look at them one at a time. We granted sacramental authority to deacons. Actually, I'm gonna explain this one. So, because you may not know what this means. When clergy are ordained in the United Methodist Church, they can either be ordained elder or deacon. Now, before 1992, those words meant different things. So if you know this language from 1992, forget what you heard and start over with me. There are two different orders, two different ways, or two different kinds of ordination, elder and deacon. I'm an elder, right? So somebody who orders the life of the church, who pastors, who whatever, who watches over church, I'm an elder. I do what most elders do, and most of the clergy that you know are elders. There are some people who definitely feel called to ordination, but not necessarily to preach, not necessarily to sacraments. They really feel called to connect the world and the church, to have sort of, one foot in each place, as it were, right? To help the church be more faithful to the world and more responsive. That would be about like mission, it could be about justice ministry, it could be about like, Lori Boltemeyer at the Baby Fold is a deacon, right? People who, they may not work in a church, but they are ordained in the United Methodist Church. Deacon, Kelsey is on the deacon route, the deacon track. So when Kelsey is ordained, Kelsey Ross, she'll be a deacon here. She's ordained just like me, or she will be, right? We can call her reverend, we can call her pastor, just like me. But there's two things that deacons don't do, or didn't until 2 weeks ago. And one was sacraments, namely baptism and communion, and the other is itinerate. So deacons don't itinerate. They have to find their own job and then get the bishop to bless it. It's kind of an awkward thing for deacons. But she won't itinerate, so at no time will the bishop say, I need you to go to Tuscola or Carbondale or whatever, and also sacraments. But now, as of General Conference, deacons can do sacraments when needed, when appropriate for their context. So let's say that Kelsey takes a group of youth to camp or Winterfest or one of the things that they do, right? At the close of their time together, they're having their closing worship. They've had this wonderful week together. She'll be able to do communion with them once she's ordained, which otherwise she wouldn't have been able to. She'd get ordained as a deacon and then she'd have to go like call on me to like bless it over the phone or something silly like that. But now deacons have sacramental authority, so that's cool. We approved full communion between the UMC and the Episcopal Church. We passed a number of different items of legislation toward climate justice. Two examples of those are every church is now supposed to do an energy audit, which we've already done, and every church is supposed to have a green team, which we already do. We had a statement of lament and act of repentance for sexual misconduct in the church. That was heavy. We closed down at 2553, which is the disaffiliation paragraph. That is the paragraph by which the churches who wanted to leave the UMC and either go independent or become GMC were leaving under that paragraph. That paragraph is now closed. So if they still want to leave, they're gonna have to work out each of them individually with their bishop, what that's gonna look like. And they may not get their property because 2553 was to allow them to keep their property. The deal that they negotiate might not involve their property now. That just means for us, it's not such a big deal because here in the Bloomington normal area, we didn't have any disaffiliations anyway. But in areas of the country that lost huge portions, I mean, it's like, just think about like half of your family being carted off to somewhere. Like it was heartbreaking. It was just like going through divorce after divorce after divorce. so painful, so heartrending, so terrible, and they just don't want to do it again. They're like, please, for the love of Pete, that, 2553 sunset December 31st, please don't open that up. We can't go through this again. We have to get back to ministry. We can't spend all of our time negotiating these exit deals. They're just so hurtful. Larry?
Now that this, I don't know what words to use here. Now that the conference is over, the rules have been changed, set, whatever. Is there any movement toward opening this up so some of these churches that left could come back?
Oh, yeah, good question. Yes.
I've been doing a lot of reading, as you know.
Yeah.
And I really get the feeling some of these conferences or some of these meetings, these people are saying, maybe it wasn't the smartest move. Right.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. So under 2553, churches that wanted to leave the United Methodist Church, presumably over issues related to human sexuality, but really there were all kinds of reasons, could leave, right, with their property, blah, blah, blah. In some cases, churches that didn't necessarily have an issue with human sexuality, maybe didn't even necessarily have issues with anything, but folks from the GMC and the WCA kind of encouraged them, you know what I mean? Said, hey, this is going to be, the United Methodist Church is going down, they're going under, they don't believe in Jesus anymore, they don't believe in the Bible anymore, you want to get out of there as quick as you can and come over here where people are faithful. And so people were sort of led out. I want to be careful about saying led astray, but honest to goodness, some churches were lied to. Some churches were fed misinformation about what it meant to leave the UMC and to join this other cooperative or to go independent. And part of the reason I know that is because we get to this spring, heading close to annual conference, and some of those churches are right now calling their district office saying, how come you haven't sent us a new pastor? And the superintendent's like, you left. You don't get a pastor. So we don't do that anymore. You left. We're not responsible for you anymore. What? We didn't know that, right? So some churches left under false, they were told something that wasn't true. So maybe that 25% of US churches that have departed, maybe that's not a permanent number. So one of the things that we did at General Conference was to say, if they want to come back, will boards of ordained ministry or cabinets or whoever it is, will conferences provide a way for churches to come back? And yes, resounding yes.
Second part of that question.
Yes.
Is there any kind of a movement to help churches understand better what happened? And I have 2 or 3 specific instances. People that attend the Methodist Church, 2 of them, their pastors have told them, it's nothing to worry about, it's no big deal, changes, we're just gonna go on like we are. And I'm going, no. Yeah. And it's a morning coffee table, so you have to limit this to a very narrow window. These people aren't getting the whole truth.
Larry's talking about people who are not hearing what just happened at General Conference, and either they're being fed something that's not true, or it's just being downplayed. Nothing changed, nothing happened, right?
One comment in particular.
Yeah.
Oh, that movement will never come this far north of the United States.
That movement will never come as far north.
Right.
Okay. Don't even know what that means, but that's very interesting. Yeah.
I choked on my coffee.
Well, I mean, let me say this, not in defense of that, because the answer is, we're doing that right now. Is there any move to help people understand? I'm doing it right now. This is being recorded. It's being live streamed. Others can listen to it. We'll do a report at annual conference. I get to help coordinate that. So in our annual conference, every church will send members to annual conference who will hear our report that I'm writing, and they can bring it back and share.
Every church without exception. I mean, they have no choice.
Yeah, they have to send their clergy and a equalizing layperson. They can also take this home, the sheet for junkies, right? Take a couple of these and give them to your friends, right? Now, let me say, not in defense of nothing has changed, but I just want to go back. I don't like going back to 2019, but just for a second, I need to do this. When I came back from 2019, my heart was broken. My spirit was broken. It was a very, very difficult and painful place to be. A lot of people in our church were feeling that way. There were a lot of broken hearts throughout the church. And the best I could do was to say, Wesley United Methodist will always be a church that welcomes everyone. no matter what the general conference says, no matter what the vote was, this church will always welcome everybody, and that's not changing. That might be a euphemism for, or another way to say like, okay, nothing's really changing. Now, when I heard other people say that, when I heard the conference staff say, nothing changed at General Conference 2019, we kept all the same rules, we just shifted a little bit. I was like, no, no, that is not right. And that hurts me when you say that, because everything changed and I'm a mess right now, right? You're not honoring my grief. But to you, I would say from the pulpit, this church will not change. We're not going to suddenly stop being welcoming just because of some votes. So there is a sense in which how things filter from general to local is a little bit specific to who your pastor is, right? And what your leadership looks like and how your membership decides to act. There were churches out in 2019 who rose up in resistance and broke all those rules, you know? They actually went the other way. Not only did it not change for them in the more conservative direction, but they went all the way the other way in resistance. So I sympathize with people who either don't understand or are struggling to represent it. If you want me to come have coffee with your buddies, I'd be happy to.
No, you don't want your trip.
I don't want to.
You don't want your trip.
All right. Well, I would if you invited me. Okay. Number 10 tenure of bishops, the vote to do term limits on bishops failed. Bishops are still elected bishops for life in the United States, not in the central conferences. And our bishops were reduced by 5. I said 5, it's really 7. And African bishops increased by 2. Because we promised them 5 a long time ago. Here's a personal story I want to tell you. Not personal about me, but a story that's related to Wesley Church. This one is really exciting. Back in, shoot, I've already forgotten the year. 1994? I don't remember. Back in some year, 92, right around the same time as Frank Schaefer was being removed from his post. And if you watch the Act of Love movie with the RMN folks, you know that story. Right around that same time, Beth Stroud, who's a United Methodist pastor in Pennsylvania, was removed from the pastorate because she was a lesbian married to another woman. She came out to her congregation. They gave her a standing ovation and embraced her and accepted her for who she was. But somebody filed a complaint. And her bishop, John Stroud, had no, is that right, Stroud? Scholl. Stroud. Anyway, she's Stroud, Scholl. Her bishop had no choice, he felt, but to proceed with the trial, and she was removed. And there was appeal, and the appeal was defeated. So she has not been able to be a United Methodist pastor because of her sexual orientation all this time. You can imagine how painful that is for her and for her family. Her mom, Jamie Stroud, hadn't set foot in a church really till that happened. However, Jamie Stroud just moved to Westminster Village and made friends with the Burgesses, and the Burgesses invited her to church, and she came the first week, when we were making the report about General Conference, and then she came again last Sunday and last Tuesday to Bible study and said, please be praying for my daughter. They're voting on her reinstatement, and they reinstated her. Beth is now a pastor in United Methodist Church again. And that is now a personal story. I never met her. I didn't know anything about this story other than like the media, but her mom is part of our church now. She's one of us. She's one of us, right?
How will this work? Okay, can be a pastor. Will she be appointed?
Will she be appointed? That's a good question. If I understand correctly, she's not seeking appointment because she's already a seminary professor. So she's probably going to remain in her position as seminary professor, but just to have her ordination reinstated, right? To have the harm undone, right?
Speaking of appointments, did any of the churches disaffiliate because of itinerancy system?
Did any of the churches disaffiliate because of itinerancy? Here's what I think, although I can't say yes, absolutely, I talked to this person, whatever. Here's what I really think. For some, it was specifically about human sexuality, but for most, I want to say for most, they chafed against the connectional system in all its forms, which would include itinerancy, which would include the appointment system, which would include apportionments, which would include the giving that we do to things that you might not particularly agree with, right? I think a lot of churches chafed against connectionalism because they wanted to be more independent. They didn't want to be moved around and have the bishop tell them where to raise their kids. And so I would guess yes. Maybe not that only reason, but Connectionalism is a big deal. It's a huge part of who we are. And I love it, but sometimes I don't. Some days I don't, but mostly I do. Yeah. Harry?
You said that regionalization will take several years for all the annual conferences to approve it. So that will not be in effect until that happens.
Right.
What about the paragraph that you talked about, 2563? If it was passed at this general conference, when do those legislative changes take
Right.
place?
So she's asking what the changes that we made at general conference, except for regionalization that has to be ratified by all the annual conferences, right? You understand that's an exception, except for regionalization. When does everything else take effect? Almost everything takes effect January 1st. That's normally how that is. However, reinstatements and the removal of the harmful language take place immediately. Like the day after general conference, like May 4th. Because we slipped that in there. Yeah. Yeah. No wasting time on justice. We're doing it now, right? Yes. We have a United Methodist building on Capitol Hill. I don't know if you know that. We celebrated 100 years of that building. Woo! Happy birthday, United Methodist building. Cool. The Sent in Love document I told you about, we sent it back for revisions. Just in case you were, caring about that. We reduced the next quadrennial budget by 48%. That has really difficult repercussions, as Mark has already said, because that's mission money, that's staff money, that's bishop money, that's a lot of different money. On the lighter side, it reduces our apportionments. So every local church will be paying less in apportionments. Okay. No, it's not. It's not. It'll give us a little breathing space for a while, and then we need to get back to work. What other questions do you have? Because I did not stop like I said I was going to.
Three at least jargon alerts that people may not know what you're talking about.
Thank you.
MDiv.
MDiv is a Master of Divinity degree. That's the master's degree that you get in seminary that sends you to be a pastor, to be an elder. Thank you. GMC is the Global Methodist Church. That's the breakaway denomination that launched itself in May of 2023. And the WCA is the Wesleyan. He's really good. He's really good. My second or third sermon in my first appointment, he pulled me aside and said, "Don't ever use the word pericope again in a sermon." He's every week in seminaries and not here. Don't ever use that word again. WCA is the Wesleyan Covenant Association. It's the organization that founded the GMC. And some of them are still hanging out in the United Methodist Church, but fewer and fewer all the time. In fact, Rob Renfro left after General Conference. He was done. Which, if you know Rob Renfro, that's okay. We bless his journey. We pray that he'll be happy where he is now.
You see changes coming to our hymnal and all the literature in the back of the hymnal?
Yeah. That's a great question. So a hymnal revision has been on the schedule for really a couple of quadrennia. We were supposed to do it in 2016, but there was just too much, right? And then 2020 didn't happen. There will be a hymnal revision because we've been talking about it, but all this stuff got in the way and had to come first. But surely now we will adapt, for example, some of the marriage liturgy, right? Like I'm supposed to say in a wedding, I'm supposed to say, what's the language? Something about Christ because God created us male and female for each other, right? And normally when I do a wedding, I just leave it out. I just say God created us for each other, in love for each other. I just leave it out. But probably it will be removed, I would guess, right? I would think so. I'll look forward to that. Yeah, also good question. So the whole question about the cross and flame has been a big, is the cross and flame staying or is it going? I wasn't part of the legislative committee at which this was discussed, and it wasn't discussed on the floor either. So it was just defeated and didn't make it to the plenary, probably because it wasn't part of the 3 Rs, right? It just wasn't that important in the big scheme of things. But I do know that the cross and flame is a hugely important symbol for some people, especially in the central conferences. Like, for example, if you have a cross and flame on the side of your truck in Liberia, you can get through all kinds of checkpoints just because the United Methodist Church has so much respect. So they're not going to give that up easily. even if, and here's a cross-cultural thing, right? Even if for us, there have been these conversations about, is a burning cross really a good symbol for the United Methodist Church, right? Oh, well, we didn't think about that when it was formed, right? It has other kinds of symbolism, but there's none of that in these other central conferences. They don't have those associations. They just know that cross and flame carries power. It carries credibility and integrity and holiness with it, and they don't want to give that up. So it's not on the table right now. Didn't make it to the floor.
The old church Chatham where it's actually
Yeah.
brickwork.
So Roger and Vita attend about halftime, this church about halftime, my former church in Chatham, and their cross and flame is literally built into the brick wall. So if we had to take that out, that would be a huge pain. For now, it's safe. Scary.
Grace disassociated, that was one of the things that had to go. The cross could stay.
Right.
The plane had to go.
Right, yeah, Erie also has joint membership here, and at my first church, my first appointment, that church has now disaffiliated, which breaks my heart and Erie's both, and they had to take the flame off the cross. They're now Grace Methodist Church in Decatur, Illinois. Which, by the way, I'm not positive, but I think that's where the Dosses have gone. Jetta and Messiah Doss, I think that's the church that they're going to. I just love that family. I'm so sad to see them go, and they were sad to leave. They're such beautiful people, and just hold them in prayer as they find their home. Anyway, you gotta go.
I'm sorry.
No, you're great. You've done everything I asked you and more. Thank you. Ben.
Sorry for losing
No,
track.
you're okay. It's all good. You did all good.
Oh, no.
Oh, protests, clarify. Of any kind, yeah. Again, okay, here's the reason that I'm stalling. There are often, actions for justice or whatever. So for example, I've got a photo that I didn't show you of Eric Slingerland in a line of seminary students holding a Free Palestine sign. And there were a couple of, demonstrations, actions, justice actions, for freedom of Palestine. So there were several of those kinds of things. There was an Earth creation vigil the night before, which there was a candlelight vigil, people took candles, whatever. So there were several actions for justice, but there was not anything that shut down the floor of the conference or that interrupted the proceedings, which also is new, because that's been happening since 2012, right? Pretty dramatically. And there was nothing, there was nothing on the floor. After we approved the revised social principles with the revision on the definition of marriage, about 60 Liberian delegates are from that area of Africa, Liberia and other places, gathered off-site and had their own kind of grief and protest. But it didn't happen on the stage, on the floor, and there were hundreds of other people who were celebrating, who had their party over on this side, and there was jumping up and down, and there was screaming, and there were selfies, and there was a party, and there was music, and there was a celebration, and there was lament both. But no protests that in any way interrupted or, Okay. Which is interesting, right? Yeah, different general conference, sure.
I was thinking about what you said about nothing's really changed. And I assume that with these changes, you had the ability to decide if you marry a couple or not before a heterosexual couple.
Yes.
So the same thing is
Yes.
true.
Yes.
So there's nothing in this that says that a church has to allow.
No, that's right.
Same
That's right.
gender weddings that
Right.
happen. And there is nothing that forces you as a clergy to marry same gender couples,
That's
but
right.
you are free to.
Right.
But that's your
That's
decision
good.
as an administrator.
Could you all hear her?
Yeah. So I just wonder if some of that nothing has changed because the thought process of the minister may be, I will not bless a same-sex marriage. And we as a church won't allow our facility to be used for a same-sex wedding. So those things are still possible.
Right.
But I don't view that for Wesley.
Right.
Or has that been decided?
No, so we haven't talked about it, and I don't have any doubts about where we go. I mean, as I talk to people and as I hear from people and as, the entire administrative council approved us putting the Prairie Pride Coalition sticker on our door. And I mean, we haven't taken a reconciling vote, but I can't imagine from what I know of this church that there would be a vote not to allow.
But it is possible.
It is possible.
A church
And it's,
can remain
it is possible.
united
Yeah, it is.
and
That's right. Right, the pastor could decide that they were not comfortable to do a same-sex marriage, right? And the trustees could decide that the building could not do it. So the pastor could still do it, but it would just need to be on a different site. That is correct. And in that sense, maybe nothing has changed because the language returned to neutral, right? To 1972, the language returned to neutral. Nobody is required to do. And so there's also this sort of question among some churches, like, will we be assigned a gay pastor? To which my answer is, unfortunately, there's not enough to go around. Because in my experience, gay pastors are the ones who are so committed and so faithful. They have to really want it. They have been through hell and high water to maintain their candidacy, and they are more dedicated than anybody you'll ever meet. And unfortunately, you are not likely to get one because there's so few in our house. But the cabinet still, in all seriousness, that's a little bit tongue in cheek, but I'm also quite serious. But also, the cabinet really does work to match churches and pastors with like theology. Like you actually, they've changed the forms even. Like on the consultation form for the pastor and for the church, you now have to check a box saying, do you classify yourself as like left of center, center, right of center? You know, does your church tend to be in, it's like between left and right, 5 spectrum, whatever, which on the one hand is a little bit offensive and bothersome, but on the other hand, they want to know. They want to know. If you've got a church that has a particular character, personality, you don't want to try to match somebody for it is not going to be a good fit. So are we going to get a gay pastor if you're not ready? Probably not. Right? And am I forced to do a gay wedding if I don't want? No, you're not. Who fills out what?
That rating.
SPRC fills it out for the church and the pastor fills it out for themselves. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Right? I won't be brought up with charges. I won't lose my pension. I won't lose my ordination. I can say here. SPRC stands for the Staff Affairs Relations Committee, our personnel. Thank you. I love you all. Yes.
You step back and reflect on where you think the polity of this new church is going. Because we used to always say southeastern jurisdiction, southwestern jurisdiction, powers. That's obviously changing with all of these affiliations. We used to say we were a very important national presence because of the capacity of our national agencies. We have 13 seminaries, that's clearly too many. So where do you think that, in 10 or 15 years' time, how do you think the polity of the United Methodist Church will be?
I just have to confess, I have not even thought about that at all. I have to think about it. I think we are going to have to revision ourselves. We have less of a lot of things than we had before. We have more of a lot of things than we had before. And it might grow. I don't know. I would like to say that part of what we learned at General Conference is something about the value of humility, right? And listening and collaboration. And if we can become less colonialist and more like that, I think I'll like it even better. I'm not talking about this church. I like this church, but I mean the global. That's another thing. I would like to reclaim the word global. Okay, that's become sort of like an uncomfortable word now. When United Methodists use the word global, there's always like half a dozen people in the room that go, ooh, like, don't use that word because the global Methodist Church claimed that name, but that's a word. We should get to use that word if we want to. Okay, so anyway, as we become an increasingly global church, I'd like to think that we would do so with mutual humility and respect and appreciation for one another's gifts, and that we become more like that. Yeah, I don't know. Downsizing of some things. It's gonna be tough, but it might be. So in 2012, you don't care about this story probably, but in 2012, we sort of recognized that we were top heavy and that we had way too much, overhead and infrastructure and blah, blah, blah. And we tried to downsize it and we spent the whole 10 days in Tampa doing that. Then 45 minutes before the adjournment of conference, the Judicial Council came back and said, we're so sorry, but what you just did is unconstitutional. And we all just went, 10 days, what do we do, right? But we knew 12 years ago that we were top heavy, that we had too much, that that we were gonna have to downsize and simplify. So maybe now we can do it, but do it like in a more, I don't know, cooperative way, thoughtful way. Because it really is one thing, like I told you at the Episcopacy Committee, it's different to be told, you have to downsize, you're losing 3 bishops. That's different from saying, okay, let's all look at each other. We're all in the same boat. In order for Africa to have the 2 bishops that we promised them 5, 2 quadrennia ago, we promised them 5 bishops and they've got nada. So in order for them to get what they need and deserve, and also in order to fit into this new thing, all of us are gonna have to sacrifice. And everybody prays and they sit with their, and then they come back and then we give up, right? That's a different thing. And if we can do it that way, respectfully and carefully with each other, being filled with care for each other, then the cuts aren't gonna seem quite as harsh. That's easy to say from my position, right? That's different if you're running a mission on a shoestring to be asked to sacrifice. Oh, they're so patient. You know how long you've been sitting here? Holy cow. Let me pray us out and then you can leave or you can stay, okay? But I need to give people whose tushies are getting tired the chance to. All right, let's pray really quickly. God, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you so much for being in Charlotte with us. Thank you so much for the ways in which you are continually tearing down walls and opening up doors, opening up hearts and minds, that this church might be the church you want us to be. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for being here. Hang around as long as you want.
Sarah, thank you, Sarah. Welcome. You're welcome.
And if you want the geek sheet, if you want the truly annual or general conference junkies, there's 4 copies.